It took me over 20 years to realize that I liked Indian food. And it's taken me more than twice that to find out that I like Indian cinema. I really need to start broadening my perspective. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good sense of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. Basically, we pick a particular subgenre of horror, and then we look at 3 movies from that subgenre. And today, the subgenre we're looking at is Bollywood horror movies. And it's worth noting that this is on our new Horror Movie Supplement, which was an additional 100 subgenres to the original 100 subgenres of the Horror Movie Syllabus. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because doing the Horror Movie Syllabus has given me an opportunity to really explore more horror subgenres and get more in depth into subgenres that I didn't necessarily get into as much before I did the syllabus. And it's been very educational for me personally. And so when I made this supplement, which was, just to add more subgenres to talk about for the channel, it was an opportunity for me to kind of push myself into learning more about things I didn't know as much about in the horror genre. And part of that was horror movies from different regions, different, international foreign films from different areas that maybe I wasn't as familiar with, which brings us to Bollywood horror or Hindi cinema. And I note that because there does seem to be some debate about the term Bollywood. There are people that feel that Bollywood, which is kind of like a play on Hollywood, but from Bombay, and that it kind of is just making itself seem inferior to or a replica or an aspiration of Hollywood cinema rather than standing on its own as Indian cinema. And they feel that it's strong enough to stand on its own, which is true. And then there are people who recognize the branding opportunity of calling it Bollywood and how it appeals more globally when you have that brand and have that kind of connection, and you can draw that industry connection to Hollywood from Bombay, and making it be more accessible or more appealing to the world at large, and therefore getting it out and getting more eyeballs on it, getting it to be more and more famous, which I think has proven to be true as we're seeing more and more Bollywood movies become mainstream here in America. So I think both sides have some validity to them, and I think that they make sense. And we'll probably wind up using the terms Hindi cinema and Bollywood a little interchangeably in this video. I'm not above using Bollywood just to get the clicks, man, like for the YouTube. I think that's going to be a way to draw people in. Because again, it's so well known. It's such a popular brand. But I think the brand is known for some things that maybe doesn't necessarily completely translate into the horror films of Bollywood. And that is the stereotypical musical, bright, big dance productions and, very colorful costumes and dance numbers and singing and that musical aspect that people know when they think of Bollywood. Music in particular seems to be a very big part of Hindi cinema, and really it is kind of staple. And it's interesting because I think that is the first thing that people think about when they think about Bollywood. But these movies didn't necessarily always do that. Some did. Some would do the musical montage, kind of like more like a music video. Like there would be, Indian music in the movie, but it wouldn't be being danced to or performed. It would just be more like a music montage. Other ones would do the full-on, blown-out production and the whole expected stereotypical Bollywood thing. And then some other ones just would forego it completely, or mostly, like the music would maybe just be a little bit of it in the background. And it's interesting to see how it defied my expectations, at least, in terms of how the music was getting used. It's probably worth noting that my knowledge about Indian cinema is pretty basic coming into this. Like, I've seen Slumdog Millionaire, and that's about it. Like, I don't really know a lot about it. Again, this was supposed to be partly me educating myself and kind of learning new things about horror. And this was something that was very new to me. So I was trying to go in open-minded, but I did have my stereotypes in my head. And it was both surprised and somewhat pleasantly surprised to find out that it wasn't all what I thought, but also that sometimes it was. And that it still worked for me, because we all know I don't love musicals, but sometimes the musical stuff worked in the movie really, really well. It was also interesting to see the themes that kind of pop up. I'm a big fan of the theory that horror movies reflect society and kind of like societal concerns and where we are as a culture. And I definitely think that's easily true in American cinema for sure. And I think it's true in Bollywood cinema as well. I saw a lot of prevalent themes. Like the vast majority of the movies, I mean, pretty much all of them, the horror movies were supernatural in nature. And there was also a lot of themes of like faith or superstition versus like medical science, and kind of like the clash of those two cultures, like the modern, arguably Western influence versus the Eastern historical or traditional culture. There is a lot of stuff about how women are treated in the movies, or in the culture, frankly. It's reflected in the movies. There is a lot of focus on the history of the relationship between India and the English, and the colonization and the fight for independence. That comes up a lot. And it's not for nothing that the movies are in Hindi, but they are, and then apparently they get translated into other languages as well, and that kind of constitutes other areas that are not necessarily Bollywood. There's some other types of cinema that kind of spread out amongst the country, depending on the language, from what I can tell. And if I'm wrong on that, correct me in the comments, but that's my understanding of it. But it's interesting because a lot of times, the movie's in Hindi, but they'll slip into English for a phrase or two. There's a lot of English woven in to the language that they're speaking, which I guess is just how people talk in India. I've never been to India. I don't know, but I was very surprised by that. And it was very interesting to see how much English got incorporated into the movie, just kind of naturally. Like if you've been to Mexico and you see people talking in Spanish and they slide into English for certain phrases. It's the same kind of feel. At least that's what it felt like to me. So I found that very, very interesting. So there was a lot to absorb in learning about the culture by watching these movies. And it's admittedly a small sample size, but it was fascinating to see the themes that kept popping up and recurring in these movies, and also just some of the technical aspects of this. I already mentioned like the singing or the montages, the musical stuff like that. The casting is interesting too. Like the looks of the lead actresses tend to be very similar, for example. And then the lighting issues. We'll talk about this in depth as we go through the movies, but a lot of the movies feel very bright, and I don't mean like bright and garish like Bollywood dancing, but I mean like nighttime looks very bright. Like they don't know how to light during the day a lot of the time. Not always, not consistently, but again, we'll get into that more. But there's just a lot of interesting observations. It was a very educational, interesting experience, and by and large, loved these movies. Loved them. This was great stuff. I really enjoyed everything we're going to talk about today. It's all good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and rank them undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate level based on the order of how much I like them. The more and more enjoyable to me as they go on. But really, all of these are winners. So grab yourself a mango lassi, maybe some garlic naan, settle in, and let's get into these Bollywood horror movies. The first Bollywood horror movie that we're looking at today, the undergraduate level selection, is Bhool Bhulaiyaa. Bhool Bhulaiyaa came out in 2007, and apologies if I'm not pronouncing things correctly. I'm going to do my best in this video, but it's not my Hindi is a little bit rusty. Let's just put it that way. And this is a movie that probably most closely dovetails with what the common stereotypical thought of a Bollywood movie would be. It has that look. It has the musical performances and the dancing and the bright outfits, and it really does lean into the stereotypical Bollywood culture that at least I think of, and probably many of us think of when you think of Bollywood. And yet it still manages to weave in the horror themes and some comedy too, but we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young man and his new bride that go back to his home and want to move into his ancestral palace that the family won't live in because it's supposedly haunted. He doesn't really believe in that, and his wife is really interested in the history of it, so they want to move in. Only, of course, when they do, hijinks start to abound because there's all kinds of weird hijinks going on in this movie. And I mean that quite literally, because this movie is sort of a comedy horror. It's really quite funny, and I think successfully so. Like, does it blend the horror and comedy perfectly, like I'm always talking about when it comes to horror comedies? Not so sure. I do think that the horror aspect of this is maybe a little bit light, at least going through the movie entirely. Towards the end, I think it gets stronger, but there is a lot of comedy in this that's very kind of slapsticky and silly, and it worked for me. It was actually pretty good, but it also kind of undercut the creepiness of this movie. This is a movie where I do feel like the lighting of it is letting it down a little bit, so it's not quite setting the proper spooky mood, and it's still kind of too bright and too happy and too upbeat to really be creepy or unsettling. Now, it does have some beautiful locales. The area where they shot is gorgeous. The house that they're filming in is beautiful, and you're going to hear that coming up a lot. That's going to be a common refrain in these movies. So it looks great. It's really well made. The production values are very, very nice in this movie, and it's very eye-catching, but it's not necessarily filling you with any sort of sense of dread or anything like that. What it is doing, again, is setting up a mystery that's pretty intriguing and entertaining you with some comedy and some interesting characters, some caricatures, if you will. And it also has this interesting idea of what I was talking about earlier, this idea of superstition versus science. The family is very superstitious about these ghosts, and then, you know, the main guy is bringing in his buddy, the psychiatrist, who's representing science and kind of a very Western clinical view of things, and they're clashing. They're not necessarily seeing eye to eye. And it's a big theme of the movie. It's a big part of the drama of the movie and the mystery and the plot. And it works really, really well. Now, the movie is long. The movie is well over 2 hours long. And so it does sometimes feel like it drags a little bit. And of course, they break into song every once in a while. Although when they do it in really clever ways. Like there is, you know, the traditional Bollywood musical numbers that happen and everybody's dancing and singing and stuff. But like, it's like at a wedding. So it kind of seems like it fits there. Or there's one time where, you know, there's a woman who is kind of like possessed and stuff like that. And it, like the performance is in her head, but then you're seeing it from the perspective of other people. And it's very creepy and unsettling. They actually did that in a very creepy way. That's where the movie towards, you know, the third act was really starting to figure out how to make the creep stuff work, how to make the scares feel like they hit a little bit better. And that's when the movie really locked in for me. I was having a good time throughout, but that really sold it for me as, yeah, this is a good horror comedy. This is working for me. And horror comedy is driven in no small part by the guy who plays the psychiatrist. His name is Akshay Kumar, who apparently is a big star in Bollywood cinema. I of course, not really familiar with him, but he is great here. He's very eccentric. He's on the poster of the movie, and he looks kind of wacky and wild, and he kind of is wacky and wild, but he also has a very serious center where he actually is there to help, and he is kind of the hero of the movie, but he's also kind of goofy and weird and eccentric, and somehow he makes that work, and he's a big part of why this movie is good, why I enjoyed it so much, and why I think, and for at least I think, probably why it was a big commercial and critical hit. Critics really enjoyed this. It made a lot of money. It was a success. And so much so that they've made some sequels to it that apparently are unrelated narratively. I haven't seen them yet. I might check them out, though, because if they're as good as this, and if you've seen them, let me know, because I'd like to know if they're as good as the first one. And the reputation seems to think that at least the second one is quite good. Probably worth checking out, because this one I enjoyed very much. It's the, you know, the least of my favorites, I guess, in this, but very, very good. Like I said, it's a little overly long, but I kind of didn't care because I was having a good time. I was having a good ride with this movie. And like I said, all of the characters were fun. They were interesting. They had enough of a mystery going on of what was going on that I was buying into it. And then when the psychiatrist comes in, it just injected this whole new energy into the movie, both in terms of his performance and in terms of the debate, the science versus superstition debate. All this stuff was very interesting, very good. I would recommend this movie for sure. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Like I said, it's a little long, so plan for that. But I think you'll be entertained. And if you have an idea in your head of what you would expect Bollywood cinema to be, this is a good place to start, because this is going to be meeting those expectations while still giving you that horror taste. So good starter movie for Bollywood horror for sure. Check it out. This is a good place to start. The next Bollywood horror movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is 1920. Now, 1920 came out in 2008, but it is set in 1920. It is a period piece, and it is a little bit farther removed from your typical Bollywood cinema expectations in terms of the musicals and the dance numbers and stuff like that. This one has a little bit more of a classic horror movie look, a classic horror movie setup. It feels a little bit more familiar to a horror fan, and I think that's by design, and I think it's very effective, but we're going to get into all of that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young architect and his love who had to run away from his family and their traditional values because she is British born and they didn't like her. And so they've run off, and he's struggling to find work, but he gets a job to be an architect for a new hotel that's going to be built on the land of a current mansion that's set up there that's supposedly haunted. They move into it, and of course, these spirits are are unwelcoming, and they are trying to possess his wife, and she is reaching out to the church for help, even though he has lost his faith. And there's some drama with that as well. But the movie, of course, goes into some extremely familiar hijinks, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. We'll stop there to not spoil the movie for anybody. But this movie owes a huge debt of gratitude to The Exorcist. It is very clearly influenced by The Exorcist. It's not even trying to hide it. But that's interesting in a Bollywood horror movie. See, the movie is definitely dealing with Indian history. It's set in 1920. It's very much focused on the fight for Indian independence against the British, and it's leaning very much into that for the plot. But of course, it's still a supernatural antagonist. And then there's the church. And when I say church, I mean Catholic Church. I mean that they have crosses and they're doing the whole Catholic Church thing, which I thought was really odd in India. Now, again, a little ignorant about Indian culture, Indian history, so I don't really know if the Christianity has that big of a foothold, especially in 1920. But if the British were occupying, maybe it does. That seems a little odd. But the character is British born. She's seeking a church, the help from the church. So maybe this works. But for me, it really just was like, it's really just going to copy The Exorcist. So the first half of this movie, which is a long movie, by the way, it's like 2.5 hours long. And the first half is kind of this mystery, and it's a classic ghost tale. It really is working as just a classic ghost tale. And I've been talking a lot about ghost movies lately, and I just like that kind of classic setup, like a creepy house, kind of a gothic feel to it, and that like spooky, weird things happening, apparitions. I'm down for that kind of scare. I like that. And this movie was mostly setting the tone right. It did have that same night lighting issue where it's like it's taking place at night, but it's like there's a spotlight on everybody because it's just so well lit, which kind of takes you away from the mood. But when they were in the house, that got better. When they weren't outside, they really seemed to be able to figure out how to light the movie a little bit better to give you the right tone, to give you the right atmosphere. They did a much better job of that once they got into the house. And the house is lovely. It's, again, another wonderful palatial mansion that has just a lot of cool personality to it. It really, in and of itself, feels like it's its own character, and there are plot points that tie into that. So it makes a lot of sense. They found this really great location, and they use it to their advantage. Now, unlike Bhul Bhulaiya, they did not have the big musical numbers here. Like I said, they're a little bit farther removed from that. What they did have is the original Indian music for the movie, but it would be in like a montage scene where they'd show like the love affair between the couple as they were, getting ready to run off together or something like that. They would use musical montages, like music video style. And that worked for the movie. It was fine. It really didn't kind of derail anything. It seemed like it fit fairly well. It wasn't amazing or anything like that. But it didn't put me out off the movie. It kept me engaged. And then the movie's ghost story thing really kind of switches over to The Exorcist. Like, I can't really say it any other way. There are influences of other movies in this movie for sure. You'll recognize some of them. But The Exorcist is the really heavy-handed one. Like, you've even got the priest saying the power of Christ compels you. It really is on the nose, The Exorcist. She's floating and everything. They hit on a lot of the notes of The Exorcist. Now, that said, while it does seem very derivative as a result, I'm still kind of here for it because A, love The Exorcist, and B, seeing an Indian interpretation of it, kind of interesting, frankly, especially, again, working in the Catholic religion in this Hindi culture is fascinating, especially because of the way it ends. I won't spoil it, but the way it ends kind of flips all of the religion stuff that I'm talking about on its head a little bit, and that's fascinating to me. And it's set up early in the movie, but I didn't realize it. I didn't pick up on it until the end. It's a nice way they did this. The ending of this movie I enjoyed very much. And the stuff that's happening that's very Exorcist ripoff-y, whatever you will, is still working for me because it's done pretty damn well. It's not as good as The Exorcist. Nothing's going to be. I love that movie. It's a classic for a reason. But for a copy of it, not bad, especially because of the lead actor, Adash Sharma. She is the woman who's getting possessed, the wife, and she gives a great performance. In fact, when I look at the reviews for this movie, that's what people zeroed in on. Her performance is exceptional. She plays both the demon and the scared wife very, very well, and she vacillates back and forth really, really well. Very convincing. Her performance is creepy when it's supposed to be creepy, heartbreaking when it's supposed to be heartbreaking. She's very charming. She knocks it out of the park, which is a big reason why The Exorcist knockoff parts still work for me really, really well. Now, while Adas Sharma did work really well for the critics, the movie overall got mixed reviews. Like I said, she got a lot of good marks. A lot of people kind of criticized the derivativeness of it, or just other aspects of the movie not really working or coming together as well. I would disagree with that. I think it actually is a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. And other fans did too, because it was still a commercial hit. And it spawned a series of movies, again, not narratively connected. They're kind of standalone films, but there's a whole franchise of these 1920 movies. And again, I'd probably check these out because the first one, very, very strong, very, very interesting. Even though it's an obvious ripoff, I still found it entertaining. And then from a cultural perspective, still liked how they wound up going a slightly different route with the ending than what you'd expect to see in The Exorcist. So fascinating stuff, both in terms of the narrative, the story itself, and kind of the meta aspect of it, of like how this ties into Indian culture, Indian history, and stuff like that. It was all working for me. It made me want to read more about it. I kind of went on down a Wikipedia hole after watching this movie to kind of learn a little bit more. And fascinating stuff, you know. Again, it is a little bit long. There's like a half hour worth of flashback stuff that maybe could have been trimmed down a little bit because the point was made pretty quickly. You didn't need to show me as much as you did, but overall, still was rolling with this movie, still locked in, still didn't feel like it was overly long, even though it was a little overly long. It probably would be tighter, about 10 minutes shorter, maybe 15, but definitely worth checking out. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And if you have seen it, let me know, because this one apparently is pretty well known. I think it was on Netflix and stuff like that. So maybe you've seen it, and if you have, let me know what you think of it. And our last Bollywood horror pick, the postgraduate level selection, is Tumbad. Tumbad came out in 2018 and is fantastic. The movie's name refers to a small town or village in India, and the movie takes place during the period of time starting like 1918 through like 1947, so it's a period piece, and it is a really impressively shot movie that looks fantastic and just blew me away. I really like this movie a lot, and I'm about to tell you why. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young boy who's the illegitimate son of this wealthy guy who passes away. And when he does, his mom takes him away from the village of Tumbad and makes him promise to never come back, despite the fact that there are these legends that in the old man's house, in his mansion, is hidden some sort of treasure. Well, naturally, when he gets older, he goes back looking for that treasure because he's a greedy guy and does manage to somehow find it. And it fuels his lifestyle. He gets richer and richer, and he's changing more and more, and not necessarily for the good. And people are trying to figure out where that money's coming from. And the answer to that is pretty scary. And I will stop there, not to spoil any hijinks and story for you. But this movie was super cool, super original feeling, at least to me, and just a really, really well-made movie that had me right from the get-go. And part of why it grabbed me so quickly, it was first, right from the start, you could tell cinematically this movie is different from everything else we're looking at. It's darker. It's got the mood right. The production values are very, very high. It looks very good. It looks like a Western film. It looks like a Hollywood film. It looks really like it has that film language that you expect, that you understand. If you watch a lot of movies, you kind of know what I'm talking about here and the way it looks. Like it's still like shot digitally and stuff like that, but I don't want to oversell it. But it definitely had a more cinematic feel to it. It was very much focused on setting up a tone or an atmosphere and doing it very, very well. It understood how to light things. It was avoiding the problem that all these other movies had about not understanding how to light things at night and how to use shadow and darkness to its advantage to build up dread or scares. And this was evident like from the first 5 minutes of the movie. Like right off the bat, I realized I'm in for something different here. And it is very different. It's very far removed from what you're thinking about when you're thinking Bollywood cinema in terms of like the dance and everything like that. There's basically no musical aspect to this whatsoever. There is like, I think there's like one song that takes place at a kind of a club that's kind of diegetic, and it does play out, but it really does kind of fit in the movie, and so it doesn't feel out of place at all. And overall, this movie is kind of dour and serious and dark, and in the best possible ways. I also feel like the themes of this movie deviated from a lot of the other movies I was watching for this video, in that it was really focused less on things like superstition versus versus science or things like that, the history. And it really was more about a very clean, simple themes. Greed is bad, that kind of stuff. The kind of idea of selling your soul for wealth, and very simple themes, but they worked for the movie extremely well. The way that they told the story over a period of years, and you're watching this character from a young boy grow into an older man and have a family and everything like that, and how his greed and what he does to get the money affects everybody around him, including himself. It's a really cool tale, and I was locked in. It leverages like the folklore tales of the area in a way that makes a lot of sense for the narrative, but it still winds up being a very strange, weird movie, again, in a really good way. It made it stand out from the other movies. It was very different. And while the CGI in the movie isn't perfect, it looks good enough that it didn't take me out of the movie. I thought that the creatures that are in the movie looked really, really cool, and their purpose, their place in the narrative was fantastic. I really enjoyed the reveal of what they are, what they mean, and what they're about, and how they relate to this guy. Fantastic stuff. There's a lot of drama in this movie that worked for me, and there is an interesting shift in that you kind of care about this guy and then you don't care about this guy, and it's kind of a little hard to latch onto who is the good guy in this movie, but in a way that worked. Again, it worked for me really well, and it worked for a lot of people. Again, critical acclaim for this movie, commercial success for this movie. This one is a winner that people really, really enjoyed, and it's easy to see why. This movie honestly feels like a cut above to me from the rest of the movies, and that's saying something because the rest of the movies that we're talking about today are excellent. They're very, very good. This movie was great. This movie really knocked me off my knocked my socks off. It really did. I was really into this movie, and I'll be honest, I don't know if that's because cinematically it felt more familiar to me, or narratively I kind of was accessing it a little bit easier, or if it's just because it's just good acting, great directing, good story. Like the legend that they use is really, really cool and easy to understand, and everything. I don't really have any complaints about this movie. Like the pacing is great. The timing, it's not too long of a movie. It's under 2 hours. Everything about this movie is good. It's scary when it's supposed to be scary. It's creepy. It's got good effects. I have no complaints. This movie is a total knockout of the park for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll probably watch this again, and I would implore you to watch this one too. If you only watch one movie from this video, this is the one I'd say to watch because I'm enthusiastic about it. And if you've seen it, let me know. Are you enthusiastic about it too? Did you find it to be as awesome as I did? Or do you have a different opinion? I'm always open to a different opinion, of course, in the comments. Let me know. But I have a feeling maybe not a lot of you have seen this one. I don't know if this one is as like well known as like 1920 and some of the other ones that we're going to talk about, but this movie definitely deserves to be seen more. So check it out if you haven't already. So those are our selections for the Bollywood horror subgenre of the horror movie supplement. And of course, I've got some extra credit ones as well because, like I said, I found some really good stuff when I was exploring this subgenre. It's fantastic. These are all great choices as well. So let's just dive right on into them. The first extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Boot. Boot came out in 2003, and Boot translates into ghost, frankly. And it's really a much more modern movie than some of what we've been talking about. It feels a little bit more modern paced. And it honestly was going to be one that I thought was going to make the supplement proper. But it's a lot of the themes and influences that it has are reflected in some of the movies we just talked about better. So I just went ahead and just bumped it down to extra credit. But by no means does that mean it's not a good movie. And it's definitely one we should check out and talk about. And we're going to do that right now. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young couple that move into a new apartment where the previous occupant had died. And of course, there is a spirit there, is a supernatural aspect to it. And it starts to influence and possibly possess or take over the wife. And there is a mystery or a riddle to be solved for the background of why this might be happening. And the husband needs to figure it out in time so he can save his wife. And there are, of course, plenty of hijinks to go around. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie too much. But this movie is, in a way, kind of a standard horror film. But it also is bringing like legit scares, like jump scares and things like that you would expect to see in kind of a modern horror film. Even this is from 2003. It's not even as recent as some of the other movies we've talked about. But it does have a very standard horror sensibility to it. It's trying to scare you the way a normal horror movie would. Now, it does have that bright light problem that I've talked about before, where it's not quite getting the mood lighting right sometimes. And that does undercut the scares a little bit, which is a bit of a problem. But it makes up for it in like really interesting camera angles and a central mystery that is unsettling enough and dark enough that it really worked for me. It's a slow burn mystery. I'm going to tell you, it takes a little while to really get into the meat and potatoes of it. And when it does, again, it feels a little bit like an Exorcist ripoff and not even as good of a one as you saw in 1920, frankly. But it is still kind of carrying out these same themes. It has this aspect of, and we didn't touch about it too much, but wrapped into that whole faith versus science or superstition versus science theme that runs through a lot of these movies is this aspect that the mental health issues are a stigma. You know, there are, like in Blue Balaya, they talk about one of the women maybe having a mental health issue, and this comes up as a theme again in a couple of the movies, and she's treated poorly, but the accusation alone that she might have mental health issues is negative. And the same thing is happening here, where the woman gets diagnosed with a potential mental health issue, and it's a stigma. It's a bad thing to even have that diagnosis. Also, not for nothing, but like her husband is the one who's told the diagnosis. There really is an underlying current throughout these movies of a little bit of like subjugation of women, and I don't know how much of that's just cultural and how much of that's supposed to be story driven and how much of it's driven by movies where it's supposed to be period pieces, but this movie's not. This is supposed to be a modern day movie, and you still had this situation where the doctor's talking to the husband rather than to the patient. Weird stuff. But I digress. The movie is delving into the mental health issues and doing it in a way that made it kind of work. Again, like The Exorcist does do this too, where they talk a little bit about, well, maybe it's a mental health issue, not a supernatural issue. And this movie tackles that, and it tackles it pretty well. The movie overall moves really well. It's very well paced, and it's solid. It's a really entertaining, fun movie. Once again, it's largely made well, lighting issues aside. Overall, the pacing's good, the acting is good, the characters have chemistry, and they have charm, and so you care about them. And the mystery is compelling enough that you want to know what's happening. You want to know what the resolution's going to be. And I felt like it was largely satisfying. I think this movie is a lot of fun. I definitely think you should check it out. Like I said, the reason why I didn't make the syllabus proper is I felt like the other movies we picked did a lot of the same kind of things, but did them even better. But this, not to mean that this movie isn't good, because it really is. It's a stereotypical ghost possession movie, but it's a good one, and having it be Bollywood in nature really works for it. Again, we had montages rather than musicals, but it still has a Bollywood feel to it that I think you will appreciate and makes it feel a little bit more fresh to, you know, Western movies that you've seen that have done basically the same thing. So definitely check this one out if you haven't. The next extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is Dharna Mana Hai. And Dharna Mana Hai came out in 2003, and it translates into Fear is Forbidden. And the movie is an anthology movie, which is something we haven't really talked about and seen so far in this video. So it's a little bit different, but it is still modern set, and it is still a Bollywood movie and has a lot of the same tropes and concepts or themes that we're talking about. And it's based on a Western movie called Campfire Tales, which I've never seen before. Doesn't seem like it had a big impact here, but had an impact on this movie at least. Now, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is an anthology with a wraparound concept of a group of friends whose car breaks down in the middle of the woods, and they need to go looking for help. They go into the woods, and they wind up finding this deserted house, and they're waiting there for help, and they are sitting around the campfire telling stories, ghost stories, scary stories to each other to try to spook each other out. And we see all the stories as little vignettes and short stories in this anthology. And then, of course, there is a resolution to the wraparound, but we won't spoil that for you. We'll stop there so as to not spoil everything. But the movie is an interesting, simple setup, which I like. I like a simple wraparound for anthologies. And then the actual vignettes themselves work for me. They're really entertaining. They're kind of tales from the crypty. And by that, I mean they have that kind of that little bit of a sense of irony or a little bit of a twist or a stinger at the end of them, which I love. I love that kind of stuff. I love Tales from the Crypt. I like that kind of concept, especially for anthologies. So the vignettes, by and large, work for me. Some are stronger than others, which is, stereotypically true of, anthology movies. Like some of the shorts work better than others. But I'd say overall, most all of these worked for me to varying degrees, but they all worked for me. I don't think there's any that was like painful or difficult or unenjoyable or slog. I either liked or really liked all of them. Where my issue came from was with the wraparound itself. And like I said, the concept of the wraparound was fine. The setup was good. The acting is not great. It's kind of mediocre, just to be honest. I felt like the actors in the shorts were working just fine. They were good or at least acceptable. Whereas the acting in the wraparound was a little bit rough, a little bit wonky, and not fantastic. And it took me out of things a little bit. Also, the decision making by the characters was a little hard to get behind. The way they'd leave off by themselves, when to get picked off, it was kind of unbelievable. A lot of the logic went out the window for these characters, and it was a struggle to get behind it. This one might have some of the most egregious outdoor lighting issues of all of the movies. This one, it just really did not know how to light at the night, and as a result, there was just no dread or scare at all to the wraparound. It was really rough, but overall, the movie was fun. It was light fun, and even the ending tried to have a little bit of a twist, which was okay. It worked okay, but the wraparound was a little bit of a clunkiness. But it didn't bother me enough to take me out of the movie as a whole. Because like I said, all the shorts were working for me, and even the wraparound. Well, the acting was a little bit meh, and also the lighting was a little bit meh. Overall, it was fine. It was good enough, better than most of the VHS movie wraparounds, frankly, which I rewatched all those recently. Don't even ask. This movie, solid anthology movie, and again has the interesting aspect of there being some interesting cultural nods that were different to me because of the Indian cinema nature of this that made it feel fresher. So that's worth watching, and it's an easy watch. It goes down like candy. It's a light, fun romp, definitely fun, worth your time to check out for sure. So again, recommending it. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to talk about today is called Perry. Perry came out in 2018 and translates to the word fairy. And this movie is a little bit more focused on things like demons and cults, but it has some interesting roots in Muslim culture, which is a little different from a lot of the other stuff we've looked at and talked about today. And it makes a lot of use of the Muslim folklore and some of the demonology of that faith in ways that I thought was really, really fascinating, really, really cool. Now, if you haven't seen this before, the movie is about a young man who's being set up for an arranged marriage, but he and his parents get into a car accident where they accidentally kill this woman, and she has a young woman daughter, an adult-aged daughter, who has been kept in captivity and seems like she's never experienced the real world before. And he feels guilty for her, so he takes her in. He tries to help her. And it turns out she's being hunted by religious fanatics who think she might be some sort of demon or have some sort of demon connection, and he feels compelled to try to protect her while they get closer and closer, and it causes some personal problems for him. And I'll stop there so as not spoil it for you, but this is a movie where the drama of it, the story really worked for me. And in no small part because you had some really nice, charming leads who had true chemistry and were doing really good work, and the movie was spending the time building out the characters. You're really getting to know your male lead and what his idiosyncrasies are and what his shortcomings are and his insecurities are. And then you get introduced to this new character, and she's got this trauma that she's dealing with, and she's got these concerns, and you see them trying to learn to coexist with each other. And they really spend a lot of time on this. Now, for a lot of horror fans, they might feel like this is dragging out a little too long. Get to the good stuff. The good stuff's coming. Don't worry. It's going to get good. But I felt like doing this character work early on really made this movie stronger. And so when the crazy stuff would happen, I felt it more. I bought into it more. I cared more about it. Like Toombad, this movie has a little bit more of a cinematic feel to it, even though I would say it looks a little cheaper than Toombad did. I think the budget might have been lower, but it has this kind of desaturated color look, which is very different from all the other movies that I saw for this video. It really is kind of desaturated and not so colorful, and it has like this washed out kind of grayish blue and green color palette, this cool color palette. It felt very much like The Ring, the American version of The Ring, the Gore Verbinski one, in terms of aesthetic, or at least early on, and actually kind of carries out through most of the movie. And it really did a good job of building up the creepiness of it, using things like rain and the locations to its advantage to set up some creepiness. And it has a very compelling antagonist who's kind of fanatical and very intense and played very, very well. The acting across the board in this movie, very, very good. And then using this legend of Ifrit, this Muslim demon, and the aspect of that, which is apparently is a real folklore legend. I looked into it after the movie, and it really ties into it fairly nicely, and kind of building out this kind of, I don't want to say too much the Western influences that I see in this movie because it kind of spoils it for you a little bit, but suffice to say, you'll watch this and you'll recognize certain aspects of this movie in past horror classics, Western horror classics, and it works out really, really well. Now, even though the movie feels like it moves really well, I like it very much. I think it is paced extremely well. I think the direction is very good. It is a little padded. It's a little over 2 hours long. Could stand for a little bit of a trim, but not too much, because most everything that they're doing is for character work and building out those relationships and that drama. And I think that it's to that benefit. I wouldn't really want to lose a lot of that. Like, I never found myself looking at my watch, but it was a long movie, but I wasn't mad at it. Like I said, it could maybe stand to trim 5-10 minutes somewhere, just nip and tuck, but I wouldn't want to lose anything major because I think that the storytelling in this movie is exceptionally good. The way they've weaved in the folklore tales and the demonology and the cult aspects of the area in with this personal drama really worked for me, and I really liked it. Now, there are some things to talk about here. Again, there's some mental health things that are getting talked about here that are maybe not super comfortable. There's the ways women get treated here, not so great. Dogs are treated particularly poorly in this movie, so trigger alert for those of you there. There's some things in here that can be a little rough, but it's worth it. The movie is very, very good. This is another one that I really strongly considered to put on the syllabus and supplement proper, but the other ones are just so good. Like I said, there's just a lot of good stuff to choose from this for this video, and it was hard to pick. But Pari, don't misunderstand just because it's an extra credit. Excellent movie, really, really good, really, really fun. Again, really kind of leaning more into a more modern and Western attitude than to the Bollywood type setting. So it really doesn't have like the musical numbers breaking out and everything like that, but it does deliver the goods. Good story, good acting, well directed. It's a really well made movie that I found very entertaining. Again, I would recommend this to you guys. If you haven't seen it, check it out. If you have, let me know. But again, this one seems like it's a little more off the beaten path, maybe, at least in terms of America, Western audiences. But let me know if you've seen it. I'd love to talk about it. So that's going to do it for our exploration into Bollywood horror. Like I said, this was an education for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would now call myself a Bollywood horror fan. Like, I haven't branched out to Bollywood proper, like mainstream stuff, but I hear a lot of the action movies are quite good. I know RRR was a big hit recently. I'm probably gonna have to check that out now too, because I'm a fan. I'm into it now. I get it now. I'm down for it. And if you haven't checked it out for the same reason I have, like, oh, you're not into the musicals and that, give it a chance. Any of these movies on this video are a good place to start. They're all great. If you're a horror fan, you're gonna enjoy these movies. And if you check them out, of course, come back and let me know what you think. And now I think it's time to look at the Horror Trivia Pursuit card, try to answer a question live on camera, hopefully not embarrass myself. And today we're going to go with the international category for obvious reasons. And the question today is, what 1964 Japanese film is based off a Shin Buddhist parable? That's interesting. I don't necessarily know this, but I think I've got a pretty educated guess that I think is going to work, but I'm not sure. Now, we've talked a lot about J-horror, but J-horror is a much more modern aspect of Japanese horror. 1964. That's pre-syllabus cutoff. That's earlier than what we look at the Horror Movie Syllabus, which we started modern horror, which is 1970 to current days, because I said so. That's just, I made that up. But we don't usually look that far back. And when we looked at J-horror, we were looking at things that came out in like the 90s, right? And the 2000s. So this is not an area of expertise for me at all. That said, I think I know the answer. And if you are a fan of Japanese horror, and if you're a fan, or you're just a big hardcore horror fan, you might be able to deduce this as well. And again, I'm not sure I'm right, but my guess is, I think, a pretty solid guess. I really do. And I'll explain my reasoning when I give it, but I'm giving you a chance to think for yourself and lock in your own answer. To lock it in, here's the thought process I have. So there is a Japanese horror movie that is pre-1970. I'm not positive that's 1964, but that sounds about right. And it's very well known. It's very influential and very, very good. And we are probably going to talk about it in a future video. That's how good it is. It's the only Japanese horror movie that I can think of that is older. So that's like pre-1970. So that's going to be my answer. And maybe that helps you too, because if you know anything about horror history, maybe that helps you too. Maybe that's a clue for you. So my answer is Onibaba. Onibaba is the Japanese horror movie that I know that's pre-1970, and it's an older movie, and it's excellent, and it's pretty influential and important. So that's my answer. Onibaba is my answer, and I'm going to check the card. Onibaba, 1964. So that worked out. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel pretty good about myself for that. I kind of just used some deductive reasoning there. It's like, okay, this is the only movie I can think of that fits the time frame, pre-1970. So, and if you haven't seen Onibaba, check it out. It's wild. It's really great. It's fantastic. And like I said, I think we're going to wind up talking about that in the future. So you can always wait for that. But it'll be a little while before we get to that one. But Let me know if you've seen Onibaba, what you think of it. Let me know if you got the question right, and if you didn't, what did you guess? I'd like to know the bad and wrong answers, especially if they're funny, of course. Thank you very much for hanging out. I hope you check out some of these Bollywood movies. I hope that you're you like me, get a little bit more interest in this area, because lots of stuff, rich, fertile ground to check out. And if you are already a fan of Bollywood cinema, leave me some recommendations of other ones that I should check out in the comments below, so I can check them out and learn more about this, because it's awesome. It's great stuff. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate you guys and your support. Until next week, I'll just say, class dismissed.